Good morning, everyone. I would like to start by reminding you all to turn on your phones while you leave the room after the session. Welcome to the session, Israel and the World Jewry. Don't mind the gap, bridge it. Recent crises between Diaspora and Israeli Jewry have revealed a need for new solutions to bring together the Jewish people in ways that go beyond governments and established institutions. What dramatic steps can we take to fill the gap between Jews in Israel and the diaspora? What role should the Israeli-American community play in the process? With us today, we have Eric Goldstein, CEO, UJA-Federation in New York. Eric Goldstein is a longtime active member in the Jewish community and served in a number of senior lay positions before being appointed UJA-Federation's CEO in 2014. Before joining UJA professionally, Eric was leading partner at Paul Weiss, Rifkind, Wharton, and Garrison, LLP. He is a founding board member of Yeshiva University's Israeli Graduate School of Jewish Education. Oh, that's a long name. And has served as chair of the board of Manhattan Day School, a board member of the New York Legal Assistant Group, president of the Bet Din of America, and a board member of the Ramaz School. Eric received the Torch of Learning Award from American Friends of Hebrew University and was participant in the Wexner Heritage Program. Also with us today we have David Suissa, who will be chairing this session. David Suissa is editor-in-chief of Tribe Media and Jewish Journal. He is a branding and advertising consultant, as well as a popular columnist and eloquent Israel advocate. He is the founder of Olam magazine, millsforisrael.com, and CEO of Suissa Miller Advertising, USA Today's Agency of the Year. Suissa's writings on advertising have been published in several publications, including the Los Angeles Times and Advertising Age. He is also president of Tribe Media Corp and Jewish Journal and writes frequently on Israel and American Jewish affairs. Also with us, we have Jacky Teplitzky, IAC National Board Member and UJA-Federation of New York Board Member. Jacky Teplitzky is among the country's elite residential real estate brokers, the leader of the Jacky Teplitzky team and licensed associate broker at Douglas Elliman in New York and Douglas Elliman, Florida. She has sold over $1 billion in real estate to investors, buyers, and sellers in New York, Miami, South America, Europe, and Russia. Jacky, who frequently appears in New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, WNBC TV, and Bloomberg TV and radio, was born in Santiago, Chile, raised in Israel, and served as a sergeant in the armed services there. Also with us, we have Dr. Len Sachs, director of Cohen Center for Modern Jewish Studies, the Steinhardt Social Research Institute. Dr. Len is a social psychologist whose work broadly concerns how individuals are influenced by their social environments. More specifically, his work includes a variety of evaluative and policy-focused studies of education, mental health issues, psychological testing, and the development of Jewish identity. Dr. Len is the author of or editor of nearly 250 publications. In 1989, he was awarded the American Psychological Association's Prize for Distinguished Contribution to Psychology in the Public Interest, early career, and he has been Science Fellow for the United States Congress and a Fulbright Professor at Haifa University in Israel. Dr. Len is also involved in a variety of Jewish communal activities and is a member of the Board of Governors of Haifa University. Enjoy today's session.
Thank you. Testing, 1, 2. Can you hear me? I don't need a mic. I'd like to start with a disagreement. The fact that I disagree with the title of this conference. It says, "Don't mind the gap." So we've been minding the gap for 4,000 years. We're going to continue to mind the gap. I love the fact that Jews kvetch, that we complain, we mind the gap. As a journalist, minding the gap is part of the reason for our success. We study problems, we confront problems no matter how deep they are. So the second part of the title of the conference is accurate, because we're going to talk also about how we can bridge the gap. But I just want to make it really clear that the gap is a real problem between Jewry in Israel and Jewry in the diaspora. And it's not something that we should feel guilty about. I asked my kids that they could marry in the 2% of the population, and in Israel, it's a completely different thing. We're 2% in America and 80% in Israel. How could there not be a gap? The societies are so different. The contexts are different. So as much as there is a gap, it's something that we could honestly confront. So I'd like to spend the first part of this discussion talking about the gap. And we have different perspectives here. I'm going to start with Dr. Sachs, who I've been following his readings for many years. He's going to start, he's more of a scholarly view. He's a social scientist, among many other things. And I want to ask the three panelists to give me their interpretation of what they think the problems are. We hear about them a lot. There are certainly, it's nothing new, but I'd like to hear them spend a few minutes on what they think the problems are, and then we can evolve the conversation into solutions. Leonard?
So let me start by disagreeing with you.
Good.
A Jewish conversation. Yes, there are differences between American Jews in particular and Israelis, but there are also lots of differences among Israelis. We had a session a few minutes ago where some of these differences were self-evident. Also, American Jews, the rap may be that American Jews are assimilating, but American Jews are not like other Americans. We are a very distinctive population. We are the most highly educated ethnic religious subgroup. Socioeconomically and otherwise, we are very different than most other people. We live in only a small part in general of the United States. And I actually think that we have lots in common with Israel. And I want to make a distinction to start the conversation between called policy differences at an institutional level, political differences, and the people-to-people issues. That I think that I'm a Ute in the sense that we are connected to each other, that we have a sense of responsibility for one another. I think that is alive and well. And I'll just give you one quick example. I study, among other things, Taglit, Birthright Israel. What is the secret sauce of Birthright Israel, and what is, from my perspective, the most important thing? It's the mifgash. It is the experience of American diaspora Jews encountering their Israeli peers. They form relationships, no matter the fact that the Americans have totally different experiences. They're in fancy colleges, their peers are for the most part in the IDF, but yet they connect. And so on a personal level, forget about all the political stuff, on a personal level they feel connected. And that gives me a sense of hope.
Okay. Eric, I'm going to ask you to speak next. He's been way too positive. There's not going to be any conversation today if all we do is spin it. Yeah. He's going totally Sephardic on me. He's way too much hope and positivity. So I need some serious recognition of the problems. And number two, if you can make a distinction between the different groups of Jews in America, for example, among Orthodoxy versus non-Orthodox and so forth, because there are differences.
Oh, for sure, and good morning and thank you. Let me first say that you described the the gap as between Israelis and Americans. And Len said there are plenty of gaps in Israel itself. There are many, many gaps in America itself among Jewry, and it doesn't simply break on Orthodox versus non-Orthodox grounds, even though that's clearly one of them. But, for example, the Federation movement exists to try to bridge the entirety of the Jewish community across a spectrum, and I think we're under greater pressure than ever to maintain that sense of connection. I think there are lots of reasons for that. I think many of them are Israel-related. For many, many years, the glue that connected the American Jewish community, and maybe even world Jewry, was a common case about Israel, Aliyah, Klita, state building, pioneering, and it was a hugely unifying source of pride. Today, regrettably, I'd say Israel is the single most divisive issue in the American community, pitting American Jew against American Jew, not unlike the differences that exist in Israel, Israeli against Israeli, over what is the right way forward. And you have two vastly different narratives, very, very difficult to bridge them. And one believes that the other is leading to the ultimate destruction of the state, and the other one believes it just as intently.
Is that the only cause, is a political thing, when I'm talking about the...
No, I think there are many. I think that's a significant source of divisiveness, both between American Jew and American Jew, Israeli and Israeli, and American Israeli. You add issues like the recent Kotel and conversion, which are not new issues. You know, Mihudi, who's a Jew, has been a challenge between diaspora and Israel for a long time. These recent manifestations of it are another layer of divisiveness and serious. And then on top of that, you have the general political polarization in the country. You know, we're all getting our news in our own echo chambers, making it worse and worse. But there's a disconnect between Americans and Americans and Israelis, and I fear very much about the disconnect between American and Israelis, and left unmanaged what this community looks like in the not-too-distant future.
Jacky, elaborate on this disconnect.
So I actually am going to use my own personal example, because I think that, you know, when you understand something, then you can explain it to both sides of the equation. So when I came to New York, and I started to get these phone calls from this organization by the name of the UJA-Federation of New York. And they said, we would like you to come and join our real estate group, and we also have a women's group. And I said, leave me alone. You know, you are the Jews that basically, you represent the Jews that write checks and tell Israelis what to do. And we don't like that. Okay, so that was my first hang-up. The lady on the other part of the line was extremely persistent, okay? Happened to be that she was Israeli. So she kept calling me and kept calling me. So I said, okay, you know what? Cup of coffee. So we sat down. And then I started to realize a lot of things that I never knew before, which I think that communication is something that, you know, we have to be much more open about it, where I understood that this big umbrella by the name of the UJA-Federation, one of its agencies, it's the Jewish Agency. Well, the Jewish Agency was the establishment that helped my family going from Santiago, Chile, 35 days on the ocean in a boat to Israel. And I said, oh, my God, this clicks. So fast forward, I'm now on the board of the UJA. I'm now also on the board of the AAC, because I truly believe that we are Am Echad. We are one nation. And what we need to understand is, the Israelis need to understand the conservative movement, the reform movement, the Orthodox movement, and then those movements have to understand why the Israelis feel the way that they feel. And this is where this gap, you know, has been created. But one thing that we have to understand is that we cannot live with this gap, because with history behind us, we know, and with the present, we know that the Am of Israel has only one land, only one, and that's the land of Israel. So therefore, we have to find the formula to bridge the gap.
Gotcha. You know, I grew up with Am Echad, but it was a lot easier to have Am Echad because we had the drama of the Six-Day War, we had the drama of Entebbe, and Israel was very much of a David against Goliath. We had a protective feeling towards Israel. So the goosebumps came naturally for my generation. But in the past 20, 30 years, you know, the goosebumps have been gone. And Israel is now seen as a very, very powerful, more Goliath than David. Also politically, the past 10 years have seen one type of government in Israel, which is a right-wing government. So it's a totally different context for the new generation than the generation that I grew up with, where Am Echad is certainly not the default position. So given the current situation and the current context, is it realistic to expect that we can bring back this Am Echad feeling? And if not, then what is realistic to expect? Leonard.
Well, I mean, just to confuse this discussion with some of the facts about what's happened. You know, in 1990, when the National Jewish Population Study was done here, showed that fewer than 1 out of 4 American Jewish adults had visited Israel. Today, that figure is over 50%. And young adults in 1990, who were very unlikely to have visited Israel, now the majority of them have. That's an extraordinary change. And I think on this people-to-people level, there is much more understanding. To riff on a comment that I think Winston Churchill made about America and the UK, we are one people divided by a common language. I think American Jews and Israelis are divided right now by knowledge of Ivrit, that the inability of virtually all non-Israeli Americans to speak and to understand what is happening in Israel is a barrier. My sense is that chinuch, educating people, is the issue. I'll just make this as my final point, I take issue with the notion that disagreeing politically with the stance either of the American government or the Israeli government is a sign of disconnection. In many cases, it is a sign of connection. And again, the fact of the matter is that you can count on your fingers the number of, say, young Americans, American college students who support, Jewish American college students who support BDS, even though those who do get a lot of attention. We essentially give them a megaphone to make what are, in effect, anti-Semitic statements about Israel.
Great. Eric, there's a convention. Oh, yeah. I just want you to address one point as well, which is there's a conventional wisdom that all we got to do is send them to Israel, whether it's on a birthright trip or a gap year or so forth. So in your answer, in your next comment, if you can address that point.
Look, to begin with, I agree with Lynn that the fact that we have as many young Jews in Israel through birthright today, and certainly contrasted with history, is a very, very positive, wonderful thing. The challenge, though, is if you look at the recent Pew Report surveys, the children of 30 and under Jews, their attitudes towards Israel are much, much more negative than they were even 5 years ago. So as you have this greater and greater influx of young Jews to Israel, it's still not reversing, or it's certainly not leading to a greater sense of connection and sense of well-being about Israel. And I think that has to do with the fact that 10 days is a wonderful thing, but unless there's significant follow-up, those feelings of warmth towards Israel are fleeting. But beyond that, I really think that there are a series of issues, and it's one laid on another, I think the political questions are very, very significant. American Jewry is overwhelmingly liberal and democratic, and they see an Israel that is turning, again, for reasons that they don't fully understand. There needs to be greater education both ways. But American Jewry see Israel moving rightward, NGO bills, various other efforts, taking of Palestinian land for dollars. And the result is a continuing erosion of this relationship between American Jews and Israel, particularly, but not only our young kids.
Now, what about the connection? What about the connection to Judaism, right? Is there a connection in terms of, we know that the new generation in America is losing, in a certain sense, its connection to Judaism, and is that part of the problem, Jacky?
So first, what I wanted to say is that and I wanted to go back exactly to that point, to Judaism. Why? Because the problem is that, we have political issue, which is one issue, and then we have Judaism, which is a different issue, in my view. You have governments change. It's not the same government all the time, but Judaism stays, correct? So the problem is that with us, we mix them up. And we basically, so the American Jewry, and I have a lot of them for Shabbat in my table. I belong to a conservative synagogue. So what I hear in New York is, mixing them up. So judging the Israeli people, as what the government is doing. Well, I mean, if you reverse it and you're going to judge what is happening in this country, and you're going to say that all Americans are like the political decisions here, I mean, think about it for a minute. So let's change it. Now, so let's bring it to Judaism and think about something that yesterday I heard, and I actually wrote it down, and I wanted to quote because it was so great. Abraham Infeld or Einfeld? Infeld. I never know how. So he said, the Jews are like a rainbow, correct? And we are like a mishpacha. So mishpacha argues. Between the mishpacha, you have a lot of disagreements, but you're still mishpacha, no matter what, and you support each other. And that's what I think that we are forgetting. And he was saying, look, you have 5 legs for to be, a Jew. One is memory, because unfortunately we have a lot of bad history. One is family, that I just said. 3, values. We all share the same values. He talked about the 10 Commandments. Then he said 4A, land of Israel, and 4B, state of Israel, correct? 2 different things. Think about it. And 5, we just spoke about it, the Hebrew language. So I think if we all memorize that, so we have to understand, and the American Jewry also has to understand, that you cannot turn your back to Israel even if you don't agree with what is going on politically. So that's what you have to do. He also mentioned something very interesting because I see it, from a different point of view. In Latin America, you go to almost any Jewish school in Latin America, all the kids speak Hebrew. Like, not only read it and write it, they actually speak it. In America, most of the kids know how to read it and write it. They don't speak it at all. They don't understand even what they read because they're preparing themselves for Bar and Bar Mitzvah. So they don't understand the culture by not understanding the Hebrew language. So there are a lot of things that the American Jewry has to change in the next generation so that what you just said, Eric, and I completely agree with you, we are losing that generation of the 30 and under. And that's why, we have to do something about it ASAP.
Leonard, the context, the religious context is clearly different. The religious context in Israel is more of the Sephardic model, what I call the traditional model. Somebody won't go to synagogue all year long, but when they go, they expect it to be what we call Orthodox, right? And then in America, the non-Orthodox world has really mobilized. And it's a serious movement. The reform movement is a genuine, serious institutional movement that takes itself very seriously. And so is the conservative, and so is the reconstructionist. That is a clear, fundamental difference between the two societies. And I'd like you to comment on that in terms of how serious that is to explain the difference and the gap.
So things are changing rapidly here. I mean, there's a rapid decline in the conservative movement, and actually the biggest increase is in minyanim, chavurot, in non-bricks and mortar synagogues where people are going for spiritual reasons. And in some ways, both the Reform movement, where there was little Hebrew, where there was little tradition, it was hard even to see the structure of the Siddur and services, that they now look much more like traditional services. So things are underway, are changing here. One of the other things that has happened is intermarriage. That it is now the case that the majority of young adults are Jewish young adults, people who consider themselves Jewish and who are by parentage, are the children of intermarried parents. And the interesting thing about that is that that's actually a positive development, because it used to be that if you had only one Jewish parent, when you became an adult, you didn't identify as being Jewish. We have seen in one generation a more than 100% increase in the Jewish identity of the children of intermarriage.
But this is intermarriage that people convert?
And no, they don't. I'm talking about the children. We now have a millennial generation, people born after 1981, who the majority of those who are Jewish only have one Jewish parent. And in most cases, they didn't convert. I'm considering the converts as members of as members of the tribe, right? The mishpacha, clearly. So you get people who don't have as much Jewish social capital or Jewish capital in their lives, and that makes it even more important. Yes, we can talk about the gaps that exist, but it makes it even more important to do education.
Eric, sometimes I get a sense that American Jews go to Israel and say, how dare you don't do Judaism the way we do? How dare you? How dare you don't respect, women rabbis? How dare you have all these differences? And how dare you don't do Judaism the way we do? And sometimes it's the reverse. How realistic is it to expect a tweaking of the attitudes from both sides? There was a letter from Rick Jacobs, the head of the Reform movement. It was very tough last week. And it seems to me that both sides are digging in.
I was in Israel last week with Rick. And it's clear we went to the Kotel together with Tzachi Hanegbi, the minister who's been charged by the prime minister with trying to reach a compromise on Kotel issues particularly. Let's step back a second. It's clear we were in Israel when in June, late June, the government on the same Sunday both announced that it was freezing the Kotel resolution, and two, introducing legislation that would, for the first time, codify the unilateral legal authority of the Rabbanut, the ultra-Orthodox chief of rabbinate, to do conversion in Israel. And what was amazing to the Americans who were there was just how uninterested the rank-and-file Israelis were with either of these issues. They were amazed at our anger. I mean, what got the news in Israel was how upset the American community seemed to be, but there was a complete lack, there was a disconnect for them on both issues. And I think, as you say, conservative and reform life in America, while it is certainly changing, is still normative and vibrant and strong. In Israel, it's nascent. They don't understand reform and conservative. Many of them have never been to a reform or conservative synagogue, and it's almost deviant. The religion they don't go to on Shabbat, but when they do go, as you said, is Orthodox, and that's clearly the case. And the Kotel, I think for many of them, is not a terribly relevant place in their lives. It's a ultra-Orthodox Beit Knesset, And so what is all the concern
No,
about? And I think that there's a significant need to connect the dots, because it's not as if the Israelis like the Rabbanut. Rabbanut controls all religion and state. Can't get married in Israel without going through the Rabbanut. You can't get divorced in Israel without going through the Rabbanut. So there is significant anger at the Rabbanut. You know, the ultra-Orthodox don't serve in the army. There's anger about that. But they don't connect at all their concerns about the Rabbanut with the conservative and reform movement concerns around the Kotel or conversion. And unless we serve to connect those dots, we will never bridge it. And that's not a short-term fix. That's a long-term fix that requires education on both sides.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of long-term fixes, I'd like you to comment on this one idea that I heard recently, which is the idea of having a reverse birthright. In the same way that we have American Jews going to Israel and feeling the Israeli energy, maybe we ought to do the reverse and have Israeli Jews come to America and feel the American Jewish energy.
Well,
if you can comment on that, Jacky.
Eric, you know I love you, always, you know. But I do not agree with you in what you just said. Okay, so you said that the Israelis did not understand, and I'm now going to talk as an Israeli, did not understand why the American Jewry were so upset. So look, in Israel, there is, and we do view the Kotel as our sanctuary, and every time that almost any Israeli that lives here or lives wherever, we do go to the Kotel, we do pray. So we actually treat it as a very, as our sanctuary. But I think there are two issues here. First, in Israel, we believe a little bit in a status quo, okay? We know there is a rabbinate. We don't agree always with the rabbinate. I had to deal with the rabbinate myself. I got divorced in Israel. So it was not easy. But we understand that we cannot be like any other country. We understand that to have a complete separation of church and state in Israel, we are going to lose what is the tzivion, what is very unique to the state of Israel. That's one thing. The second thing is, which I'm hearing a lot from my Israeli friends, is that they say, when in Rome, do as Romans do. So why is it that the American Jewry feels that when they come to Israel, they have to change, things? And we have to change things in order to accommodate you. You guys did not serve in the IDF. I did. So, we are here, we go to Miluim, so our kids go to the IDF. We are here doing, quote unquote, a dirty job, and then you come and visit us, stay in nice hotels, go to our great restaurants. You donate a lot of money, and that's why I support the UJA-Federation, because you do a lot of good, for Israel, but there is also something about respecting the laws and the status quo in Israel.
That's a good segue to my next question, because there's always this sort of attitude, it's like a human nature, which is, I want to change you, and then you want to change me. But the other model, instead of change, is exchange, right? So, Leonard, if you can comment on this idea of, is it possible to envision a future where the Jews in Israel and the Jews in America look at each other and see, what can we exchange to make ourselves better? There are so many amazing things happening in Judaism in Israel that I think can benefit America. There's the spiritual movement. There's the movement with, secular Jews studying the Torah. There's a lot of great things going on, and in a similar way, there are a lot of great things here happening with Judaism here that can benefit Israel. So can you envision that kind of a future?
Well, I think we already see that future today. The influence of Israelis on the American Academy, for example. Dan Rielly spoke this morning, but fields like psychology and economics have been transformed here by Israelis, and the same goes for Americans who've made Aliyah and spend significant time in Israel. So I think on the people-to-people level, I'll keep coming back to that, I think we're doing many of these things. We are minding the gap. I can't get subway cars out of my head when I think of that phrase. The underground, I should probably say. At the same time, there are political differences, but remember, we both live in politically fractionated societies. We both live in societies where the level of conflict on political issues within the societies has been great. Well, at least in my lifetime, I've never seen the situation that we have today. So I think we need to continue to promote these things, and I think part of it is we need to be a little bit disciplined. We need to not allow our political differences to get in the way of actually having conversations and exchanges with one another.
I also think, we have the tools now. Hey, we are here. We have the IAC and we have the federations around the country. So what we need to do to begin with is the federations and the IAC have to work together as one team, okay? And then we need to organize more and more events together, and even if it is throwing, not stones, but tomatoes, I think that's what we do. We have to do it in New York. We have, and this is something that I have been advocating because we are doing our own events, you guys are doing your own events. We have to do combined events. We have to have the American jury listen to the Israelis and vice versa, and we have them here. We don't even have to bring them to Israel. With that, we have them here. We have them in all the IAC, places where we have IAC now.
Right, but realistically, Jews are never going to get together. You got rebels, people have their own initiative, their own entrepreneurs, they have their own organizations. So realistically, organizations are going to do what organizations do. How realistic is it that there can be some broad vision, a broad vision that we can all share of exchanging rather than trying to change each other? And if that's the case, what do you see as that, as those things that we can exchange?
First of all, let me agree with Jacky. I think it's critical that I always agree with you, about the things we need to do together. And in fact, the Federation, has been doing more and more with IAC in terms of joint programming because we think it's critical to have these communities interact and come together in ways that they have not before. The challenge, and I also agree, by the way, that we need to be respectful of the ways of Israel, and it's Americans need to understand that those Israelis who live there actually live there, and it's different, as Jacky says, than coming and staying in a nice hotel and then leaving. We have to very much respect that. The challenge is, and we'll talk about bridging in a moment, you take a young woman who was converted through conservative Judaism at a young age, grew up at a conservative home, went to a day school, went to every Shabbat, went to shul, and she has such a Zionistic fervor, this young woman chooses to make Aliyah and move to Israel.
And she's told?
And under the law of return, she can return. And then she finds the young man of her dreams and wants to get married to him in Israel, and she cannot. Because she is not recognized as Jewish by the Rabbanut. Imagine the hurt. Imagine the sense, I've done everything I can. I've decided I want to live with you. I want to live among you. I want to vote. I want my kids to go to the army, and you're telling me I'm not Jewish enough. So the challenge is great in trying to maintain an adherence to tradition, not impose. But Israel has to be the nation state for all the Jewish people. And unless there's a way of giving legitimacy to reforming conservative Jewry, the rift ahead is very scary.
I'm glad you brought that up because that gets a lot of attention in the Jewish media. And given that, Leonard, what's realistic? We know that the change is not going to happen in Israel overnight. How do you get around, or how do you deal with such a fundamental issue as this Jewish woman who feels 100% Jewish in America is considered 100% Jewish, and then falls in love with an Israeli after she makes Aliyah and is told that she's not considered Jewish?
Well, being part of a family is never easy. This is not necessarily projection. This is my sense as a psychologist. We have, learning how to live and be with one another is a challenge. It's inherent in the nature of Judaism and the way in which decisions are made. And I think some of these things are symbolically very, very important. But I also think, and again, I don't want to sound like pathological in my optimism here, but I think the fact that we're actually confronting these issues, that we talk about them, and that for every issue that's come up this morning about a difference, there are significant groups on both sides of the ocean within the societies who are fighting on behalf of these issues. So that if you are a progressive Jew and you make Aliyah and the Rabbanut rejects your marriage or won't sign off, there are groups in Israel that will support you, and vice versa. So it seems to me that what we need to do to mind the gap is to take advantage of the ways in which we share a sense of peoplehood, we share a sense of connection with one another.
Great. Jacky, I'd like you to comment on this idea of how we talk about the problems. Leonard just said that that's a critical ingredient, is that we confront the problems, but there's a sense that the way we complain is so sort of divisive. And is that an issue?
When you say we, who are we?
We here in America. The letters, the joint declarations from Jews who have serious issues with what goes on in Israel. Is this an issue? Is that we sometimes go too far with the negative vibe, as opposed to what Leonard said, which is you confront the disagreement, but at the same time you recognize that there are things being done and a more constructive type of criticism? Could you just comment on that?
Exactly what I wanted actually to comment even before you asked me the question. If you are going to have the two camps, going in complete different extremes, then it's not going to be, a resolution. People choose governments. We are a democracy in the state of Israel. People choose governments. People choose, the items, the things to fight for. So I think that if the Israelis will understand better the issue, okay, and if the American Jewry, instead of getting into like inflammation statements, because sorry to say, I was stunned in the Rosh Hashanah service that our rabbis, as part of their sermon, talked about it. That's not right, So what I'm saying is, think about the damage that you can do. Let's talk about it. I'm not saying that you have to agree, but you don't have to put more, oil in the fire. So I do believe that the Israelis, and I do agree, by the way, that the Israelis do not understand completely what an Orthodox the conservative and the Reform, because I am a newly married person to an Israeli, and he came from Israel to New York. And when I took him to the high holidays, I had to compromise, and I had to go to my, a synagogue a little bit, and to go to an Orthodox synagogue, because for him to see a woman, being the cantor was something, it was very foreign. So why I'm saying this? Because I'm changing him. He's talking to his, friends. He's telling them, look, even though that this is so, actually, the only synagogue in New York City that is growing in membership is Park Avenue Synagogue. So why? So let's bring the people over. And I do understand that everybody is angry, but you cannot go and put it on the media and put it everywhere and then get all the Israelis against you. Why? Don't we have enough problems?
Yeah, Eric, I want you to comment on this idea of a crisis. I'll just give you a little anecdote. I was meeting with the head of the New Israel Fund a few years ago, and, you know, he's got the glasses half empty, half full, and I said, you guys do a lot with the half empty part of the glass. I'm sure it's really good for fundraising, the crisis mentality, democracy is ending in Israel, blah, blah, blah. But I said at the same time, another way of looking at it is that all these hundreds of groups that have the right to protest in Israel that you fund is an example of democracy in action. And to his credit, he put that on his website, democracy in action. So do you agree that sometimes we go too far with the crisis narrative and it creates a sense of despair?
I think it's a very difficult tension because I agree, we don't want to disengage from Israel. We want to engage even more. And Israel is at the core of our identity, who we are as Jews. And in fact, the point, Jacky, you asked Jacky before about Judaism versus Israel, for a lot of our kids, Israel is a proxy about their attitudes Jewishly. And so if they're feeling negative about Israel, they're also disconnecting Jewishly. So the stakes here, I think, are very, very high. How you make your feelings known around serious issues and at the same time not be seen as overly strident. We, for example, spend millions and millions of dollars on the positive side, not only trips, but programs that bring Israel to America. We bring shlichim from all over Israel on our college campuses, on camps, so our children are exposed to the best and brightest of Israel. We want them to feel a sense of pride and connection. So the goal here is not to demonize at all. It's that at the same time you have to recognize there are these challenges. And, you know, there were some right after the crisis around the Kotel and conversion in the summer who said, you know, Danny Gorda said, you know, withhold funds to this. And the Federation movement said, absolutely not. We're not withholding funds to Israel. Israel is our future. At the same time, you can't ignore these challenges. So there has to be an appropriate balance.
Now, one more question before we go to the audience. Leonard, I'd like you to comment on the education of Israel in America. There's a general criticism that it's a one-sided sort of education, very rah-rah, puts the emphasis on the positive and the pride, and then we don't teach our kids a complex story of Israel, including the flaws, including the mistakes, including the dark side, if you will, and then they get to college campuses and they feel a little cheated. They said, you guys never told me about all the bad stuff, and sometimes it backfires on us. So I'd like you to comment on two sides. One, what do we do about education for Jewish kids who do not go to Jewish day school? And two, among those who do go to Jewish day school, can we sort of make this education a little more complex and recognizant of both sides?
So it's a critical question, and I think one of the issues, and I don't think people recognize it, is that, or one of the, and I'll stay with my theme of positive developments, one of the positive developments is that the teaching of Israel on college campuses and Israel studies as a discipline, a sub-discipline at universities is one of the fastest growing disciplines across American universities. Over the last decade, there has been a quadrupling of the number of courses and I would say honest, high quality academic courses about Israel. And I think it's going to take a while for that to take effect, to change the underlying understanding, but it's now recognized that Israel, despite its size, despite its small population, is a critical area. I want to make one before we go further, I want to make one, this will be my critical comment. I think the crisis that we face right now is a crisis of leadership. I think it's a crisis of leadership on both sides of the ocean. I don't think the leadership of the American Jewish community necessarily represents the community here. And I think on the other side, from the Israeli perspective and the engagement with the diaspora, I think we have a similar problem. I think that is a serious problem, and it's one that both of our communities need to address.
Jacky, I want to ask you this on the issue of leadership. We have organizations like the IAC that have come in, and in a sense, they've sort of trying to fill the gap of this leadership. So I'm wondering if you can talk about some of the results that you've seen so far, because obviously you've had this incredible growth throughout the country. And I'm curious to see how you're measuring the impact of what you're doing in terms of connecting the two communities of Jews in Israel and Jews in America.
Yeah. So the first thing that we actually did a study in New York about the percentage of participants that are American Jews and versus Israeli Americans. And we find that in some of our programs, like Shishi Israeli as an example, it's almost now like 40% American Jews, and then the rest is Israeli Americans. So that's a very positive. We never thought that that was going to happen. We always thought that we were going to get like 5%, of American Jews coming to our programs. That's number one. Number two. We have been doing this Celebrate Israel program, that it's a much bigger program, and that I'm so happy that UJA-Federation found it that it was so great, so we're doing it now in conjunction with them. They actually are the ones that are doing almost all the publicity and advertising, and we are getting a lot of Americans bringing their children and coming over. So I see that.
Are you seeing this cooperation happen more and more between the IAC and local Jewish groups?
Yes, but I still want to say that we have some areas in the country that, unfortunately, between Federation and IAC, the relationship is not what it should be.
Which areas?
I cannot mention.
We'll find out later for all of you.
In this, I have to be politically correct. I want to say that the UJA-Federation of New York is the largest, the most powerful, so I'm sure that the other federations are going to look at the UJA-Federation of New York and going to say, well, if it's working for them, it should work for us as well. So, and everything that we are doing now in the IAC is for that. I mean, our mission statement is about getting everybody under one roof. What I would like to see next year is to have a larger American Jewry number of people coming to this convention. Because I think that when the Americans are going to see this convention, like when I remember you, Eric, the first time I begged you to come to our first one, to the Celebrate Israel. And he didn't even let me know that he was coming. And I see him walking on the aisles, and he was mesmerized. He couldn't believe his eyes about the number of people that came. So that's what we need to do, and I think that that's one of the solutions. And then if we can bring that to Israel, that's even greater.
Well, it'd be interesting to have the exact same session every year at the IAC and to measure the progress. So like 12 months from now, if we're sitting at this table, not that I'm committing, if we're sitting at this table,
I'm
then
all about
what
deal
can we
making,
say?
so you have a deal.
Can we say, like, past 12 months, this is what's happened? So on that note, I'd like to open it up to first one to raise your hand in the back.
Hello. So I actually want to specifically ask you a question. There was a debate going on between...
You being Eric.
You being Eric,
Okay.
yes, and Leonard. There was a debate going on between the two of you about whether or not the advocacy about the issues for contested Jewry in Israel was something that should be brought up and discussed with Israelis. I think the crux of the issue is not yes or no to that, it's what is being discussed. So I actually am doing my PhD research on the use of halacha in Israeli social policy and its effect on contested Jews, primarily with conversion intermarriage. And the issue is not about whether or not it is an issue for people, although many Israelis do not understand the problem. It's what is the historical aspects to why it's matrilineal descent and why Orthodox conversion is the only one currently accepted. People don't know where that comes from. And so my question is, what are you doing in actually making sure people know that info, that they know that matrilineal descent comes from Ezra the scribe, that they know what are the steps in conversion, and to show that conservative conversion can and does actually follow this, and that many people being raised in non-intermarried religious Jewish families are not ending up religious Jew and have no connection to Judaism. So how do we, one, analyze it, and how do we, two, make sure that what the information being disseminated is actually useful?
It's for you, Eric.
Eric, you're on.
I'm not sure I followed the entirety of the question, frankly, and I'm sorry. Look, we need to sensitize both communities to the standards of the others, meaning in Israel, they have lived, as Jacky was saying before, with an Orthodox halakha as being the guiding principle under which the state operates. And in America, of course, there are various other streams that have gained significant acceptance. We're not the reform or conservative movement itself and getting involved in advocating about the appropriateness of either position. What we're essentially saying is this is the community as it exists, and what can we do as a community, recognizing the legitimately held views of both sides, how you can nonetheless come together and create a sense of community. No one really answered David's question about whether, we are one is still a viable framework for the future. We are connected, certainly should be. We have a common history. We have a common destiny, certainly should be. Whether we are one, in Israel itself, the Haredim won't marry Kippah Struga either today. And they're both halachic. So these are challenging issues, but I think our responsibility is to respect the differences and say, despite difference, we need to feel a sense of common connection.
Well, maybe the future of the relationship is we are connected rather than we are one. Right. Behind me, they've been talking behind my back all morning. Just kidding. Who wants? Go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. Hi. My name is Yael, and I'm actually living in New York 22 years and married to a liberal American Jew. And I always find myself between the two worlds. I'm involved with ISC for many years, and recently I joined the UJA in order to understand the two sides and maybe bridging. And what you just mentioned, the Kotel issue this summer, I found myself right in the middle of this oil term when first of all, when the decision, the resolution came out, I was still here, and I felt like it's a punching in my stomach. I called all my family in Israel. I was like, what is that going on? Like, I felt American. Why hurting? What is it that? And I have a cousin who's involved, and he said, listen, this is democracy country. That's a government decision. And then I came to Israel that summer, and I have a bar mitzvah for my son in the Kotel. Naturally, I chose the regular wall, and like my husband's family look at me like, I didn't know you're Orthodox. And I'm like, I'm not Orthodox, but this is by default the decision of, most Israeli will do, not arguing that and respecting that status quo. And then I read on the news this big, huge title that all the Jewish leaders, and I believe you're among them, very angry, upsetting, saying that we're not going to support Israel anymore. So now I'm in the Israeli hat looking at this while I'm there and hearing the voice around me, and I'm thinking, this is wrong. The communication, even though I heard you saying now we never stop supporting, but for that to be communicated that way, and I'm thinking, when you met with Netanyahu, what was the expectation? That he will break his coalition? What was the commitment from his side? Shouldn't be communicated in a different, more democracy way, that we don't look, bad from both sides?
Yeah, first of all, I was there and went on Channel 2 the day after and said one thing we must absolutely continue to do is in every respect support the state of Israel. So we never, ever took the position that we shouldn't support the state of Israel, ever, and we will never. But to your point, what does the Prime Minister do in this circumstance? We recognize the political reality that he threatens, whether the Haredi parties would leave the government or not is an interesting question. Where do they go? So I know there are political leaders in Israel who told us this week they don't actually believe the Haredi parties would leave because they still want to be in the ministries and have the portfolios that they have. That said, so it's a challenging question, but do you use the coalition politics and staying in power, does that trump creating a sense of unity for the Jewish people? And I understand this is a complicated question, easy for us to say, here's what the Prime Minister should do, very complicated environment. But the challenge really is, there will be a breach between a large segment of American Jews and Israel unless we come to some accommodation around this issue.
Okay, we have a few minutes left. If you can keep the speeches to under 30 seconds and try to include a question. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question. I'm Israeli, and I live in New Jersey, and I noticed that actually Israelis are not trying to communicate too much with the American Jews, and we see that in the JCC. The Israelis speak Hebrew among themselves, they congregate together, they don't go to a lot of functions of Jewish celebration or Jewish activities from American Jewry organization, and they only go to Israelis parties, they go into Israeli functions, and you know, you're saying the American doesn't want to include the Israelis, but sometimes the Israelis are staying back. And I'm saying that as an Israeli. And I see that among a lot of Americans that they say, you don't want to be with us. You want to be with yourselves.
Look, the reality is we tried for years to bring Israeli into the organized Jewish community, and we did not succeed, which is why we are thrilled that IAC exists and is a forum for bringing Israelis into the Jewish community in an organized way. And we want to continue, as Jacky said, to coordinate and hopefully do that more and more. But you're right. I think there was a sense that Israelis did not feel comfortable in the traditional American structures. They felt like outsiders. And we never were successful except at the edges, in really integrating the Israeli community into the broader Jewish community. And hopefully with IAC, there's the mechanism to do that.
Okay, so we have about 2 minutes left. I'm going to ask each one of you to say your question in 20 seconds so that we can hear all the questions. So there's about 6 hands up because Judaism is about questioning. I'd like all the questions to come up. So you go ahead, 20 seconds.
Hi, I'm Tali. I'm part of the Bring Israel Home group. I came...
That's 10 seconds left.
Okay, I came with the Birthright group, so these are all people that, you know, went on Birthright. I was an advisor, and my question is, I'm Orthodox, and I led a group of secular Americans, secular Israelis, and I find it upsetting that so many of them came with zero knowledge, especially the Americans. The Israelis have way more knowledge about Judaism, and the Americans had just like zero. And
So
I think that college is like too late to start connecting to people. I think, forget about religion, like why aren't, like, I think it's sad because I feel like I grew up with so much Torah knowledge and learning a lot, and I think knowledge is really powerful, and it's upsetting that people aren't giving their children Jewish Torah education.
Got it. Go ahead. Question, please.
Mike Lefkowitz from Orange County. I have been here for 56 years, and I've been sitting on that fence for that long. I guess I see 2 different gaps. One is between the Israeli Jews that are living here and the American Jews, okay? And then the Israeli Jews living in Israel and the American Jewish community here. And from my perspective, I think that we have done a lot more from this side towards supporting Israel and getting knowledge of Israel. And I don't see that much from the other side.
Okay. We need questions. Yes, sir. Give me a question. Please.
Can we do a better job of explaining the political realities of Israel to the American public through the Batei Knesset and through the schools? Because without that, no one understands what a coalition means in America. We're a very different country politically. Can we do a better job to help bridge the gap by giving that little piece of information?
Man in white. What's the question?
The people that aren't here is the question. So Jews that support BDS, Haredi Jews.
What's the question? I'm sorry?
Well, what is their connection to the purpose of this conference? Are they Jewish if they don't care about Israel?
Okay, so you're talking about
and that's
what
I
to do
care
about apathy. Yeah. What's your question?
I don't know if they're apathetic.
My question is, we're talking about the gap, and the Holocaust is something that weaves almost all of us together. I work with Zikaron Basalon, and I'm wondering with the IAC and the UGA, what's being done to bring Jews and Israelis together through the Holocaust, through this mutual experience.
Okay, question.
Given that the millennial generation has a divergent opinion about Israel compared to old generations, what is the role of American Jewry going forward vis-a-vis Israel?
If I could do it in 20 seconds.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. You go first, and you.
I'm not sure I could do this quickly.
Yeah, please.
What I see as the problem is that there are three things. It's trifold. The political divisiveness in this country, which has torn the Jewish community, the assimilation, and the intermarriage, which causes people to be ignorant of their background and heritage, not just of Israel, but of their Jewish background and what has transpired for generations and how that has affected. Well, and the media. I think all those things have to be addressed to bring a unity or an Am Yisrael. I can't do this in a couple seconds.
Okay.
And basically, maybe it's for all these organizations, from the Israeli side, from the American side, to bring everybody together to address those concerns, because I feel that our future is not going to be bright if the Jewish community continues to be divisive and assimilated and forgetting where they come from and who they are before they can even support Israel. They need to know their background and heritage, and not enough is done with that,
Got
I
it.
think.
Can you give the mic right behind you? Thank you.
On the issue of exchange, I think that's critical. I know personally that we have Shinshinim now and a Shariach on Long Island for the third year. And the first year, they were not in the synagogues on the high holidays. This year, the Shaliach realized that that's very important for their experience as young Israelis coming here to understand where the Jewish community is coming from, and they've been in the synagogues, and it's been very meaningful. And I'm an Israeli living here for 20 years now, and I also am asking really, how much does the Jewish community invest in educating Israelis in Israel about the diversity here and the other options? Because I think the non-Orthodox community could benefit a lot. My kids go to Schechter. We're not religious, but I know my husband has learned so much from that experience, and we feel that every secular Israeli should experience the diversity and the pluralism, because they're so secular, they don't, and I disagree. I think a lot of Israelis don't know anything about their Judaism.
Okay, on that note, because I promised to get you out of here at 11:10, we're already a few minutes over. On that note of exchange, a unifying note, I want to thank our panelists for a terrific conversation. Thank you.
Nice to see you later.